Bay just for Quick Lane oil changes. Quick Lane at Valley Ford Truck is located at 5715 Canal Road, right under the 480 bridge in Valley View, just down the road from Independence. 5715 Canal Road, right under the 480 bridge in Valley View, just down the road from Independence. Come see why life is better in the Quick Lane. quicklane.com/Valley Ford Truck. That's quicklane.com/Valley Ford Truck.
You're listening to the Sports Fix.
There we go. Welcome back to the Sports Fix live across the Sports Fix Radio Network. J-Rock back with you, and we'll open up the phone lines a little later on. I've got my man, Jonathan Knight, the Sportswriter extraordinaire, in the house. We're going to talk to him. Facebook.com/The Sports Fix. Tweet with us at The Sports Fix CLE. Email us, thesportsfix@AOL.com. We're going to go right to the phone lines. My man, JK, how you doing this Friday afternoon?
Jerry, it's a beautiful Friday afternoon, made all the more beautiful by the Sports Fix.
Oh, well, thank you. I'm blushing over here, and I'm glad to have you back, my man. It's been a short week for me, but a busy one here, man. A whole lot of things going on. Before we get into the local stuff, I kind of mentioned it, just a hair going out before the thing, but, Bud Selig, by far, not my favorite person at all, and looking at what's happened. I saw some people eulogizing his tenure yesterday, like he was the greatest commissioner, and I'm like, come on, man. Like, really, they helped run a good sport into the ground with a lot of looking the other way, and this is a cat that doesn't have email, by the way, so he's really up on the latest technological advances of society, but to me, it looks like, and I think some of the owners may have felt this way too before they finally got an agreement, but the new one, Rob Manfred here, that's just an extension, in my opinion, of Selig continuing. He was a guy that backed up a lot of what he did over the last 15 years.
Yeah, I don't think much is going to change as much as people who don't like Bud and have had their problems with his tenure.
I mean, what do you
nothing's
think
really going to change. Yeah, I mean, I think I share many of the same feelings you do. I mean, you look at some of the milestones of his legacy are not good ones. You look at 20 years ago, which just this week, we're talking about the 20th anniversary of the strike that wiped out the playoffs and the World Series, the first time that had ever happened in 1994, and then obviously steroids and everything that waterfalled out of that episode. So I mean, those are the two primary things when you look back
and
at
the salary.
That's what you're going to look at. But at the same time, I think that while the common fan will look at that and disagree with things, I mean, even something as minute as calling the All-Star game a tie and having it be whoever wins the All-Star game gets home field in the World Series, silly things like that, for as much as that aggravates the common fan, I think that what you just said there in terms of people sort of mythologizing his tenure, I think we're going to see more of that, because I think when you do look back in 10 years from now, 20 years from now, when you do look back at his tenure, yes, you will see the steroid scandal. Yes, you will see the strike, the cataclysmic strike that really crippled the game there for a couple of years. But you will also see that at the end of that, baseball survived and emerged as strong as ever. I mean, and you really have to, whether he deserves the credit or not, he's going to get credit for that and for guiding baseball through that time period. So that's really, I think, we're getting a little taste of the way that historians are going to be looking back at the Bud Selig tenure. And then on top of that, like I said, I don't think anything really is going to change. I think from the get-go, when Selig was appointed, remember, he was appointed as an interim commissioner. He was never supposed to be the permanent guy, and 20 years later, he's still there. And that was the idea. He was basically one of their own, and that was the first time that had happened, and I think that's the way that it has gone. That's not the spirit in which the office was created by Kennesaw Mountain Landis now almost 100 years ago. It was supposed to be sort of a traffic cop for the owners, and that book has been officially closed by Bud Selig, and I don't think we're going back to that anytime soon.
I'm just going to tell you guys now, I don't toot our horn all the time, but I doubt that any other time this week you have heard the word Kennesaw Mountain Landis on the air on any other sports talk radio show. This is what we bring to the table here on the Sports Fix, my man. I'm with you.
Soft as minutia, yes.
I'm telling you, but I'm with you. I just was curious your thoughts on that too. How about I mentioned too before the break, John Axford. I love to appreciate guys when they leave, but I'm glad to see you go, brother. I'm sorry. I'm glad to see you go. You know what? I saw today. When you look, I don't remember where I saw this, but you want to sum up the Indian season in a nutshell besides inconsistent, and you want to take the blame for the Dolans out of it. The biggest problem with this season is that your top 5 paid players on the team have given you nothing. A couple of them aren't on the team anymore, and the rest are on the disabled list. You know, when you go through Swisher and Bourne and Masterson and Axford and even Murphy now, who's gone, even though he's been a decent producer for most of the season compared to some of the other guys. But, I mean, the top 5 are all worthless to you this season.
Yeah, and that is the core. If you're going to point to anything, even over individual problems, even with performance issues on the field in terms of people not playing up to what we expected them to, that's it. I mean, when you look at those are 5 guys that you expected to be the core of this team, and they are clearly not. I mean, for whatever reason, in some cases it's not entirely their fault, but for whatever reason they are not. And that really harkens to the overarching issue here. As much as people love to complain about the Dolans and how cheap they are and they don't put money into the team and the entire litany of complaints against the Dolans, this is really the Dolans' problem. This is the legacy of the Dolans. It's not necessarily that they don't spend enough money. They probably don't, but that's not the main problem. The main problem is they don't spend wisely when they do. When they do, we've seen, and this isn't the first time that we've seen a year sabotaged by players not performing up to their pay scale. We've seen this through the years, from Travis Hafner to Grady Sizemore to any number of other players that they've committed to, that they've done basically what we wanted them to do or what we've encouraged them to do in general, was to fork out money for talent. They've done that, and it hasn't been for the right talent, or they've overlooked things, or they've managed to talk themselves into it, or made moves for the wrong reasons, for getting the fan base excited or appeasing the fan base, God forbid, when we know that's not always the smartest thing to do. But yeah, that's the primary thing. And so now you're looking at the Swisher and Bourne deals and thinking, my God, we've got 2 more years that we're going to have to deal with this kind of stuff where they just don't play and they're banged up. And you look back and you can kind of see, well, yeah, I mean, you can see that kind of thing was in their history and could have been a problem. Does that mean they shouldn't have done it? I don't know. I don't know of any people who really, really criticized the deals at the time. But that's what you're saying. Axford, I think, is a very good example of that. I don't know what they were really hoping for. The guy, I think they were hoping for a dramatic turnaround, and that did not happen. He just turned out to be the guy that he had been for most of the last couple of years. So, yeah, that's the real issue. So to remind people of that when they complain about the skinflint Dolans and not spending money, they do spend money, just on the wrong guys.
I agree. I mean, well, people can say that they wait, and they did do that, and they did say, hey, when we're ready, we will. But that's the hit, is that you can go, they spent 117 last year. They spent this much more this year, but you did not spend it right. And that's the biggest. I mean, when you're only going to spend so much and then you don't spend it right, you're absolutely done. You know, especially when you look, trade-wise, yeah, there's been a couple of bigger ones that have not went the Indians' way, but there's been a lot that have. And so trade-wise, the Indians do pretty well. It's when they go and actually do try to spend. I mean, and I think I'll never forget. I mean, it started before Swisher last year when they were making that offer to Shane Victorino. And I'm like, man, that's going to be a bad contract right there, especially when you get down to the back end of that thing. And then they made an even worse contract offer to Nick Swisher. And I said, man, but I mean, they thought that was going to be a difference maker. That one confused me, I think, more than Bourne, even though we're disappointed with how Bourne's worked out. I mean, Swisher confused me because I think everybody thought at the best case scenario, he's good for a year, and then he's declining quickly for the last 3.
Yeah, I don't think we expected that. And I think, again, you need to look at the context of Swisher's background. Yes, he had a couple of nice seasons, but primarily with New York when he had other players around him. Yeah. So you got to keep that in mind, that when you ask a guy to change the type of role that he was when he had success, that's going to have an effect. You know, when you ask a guy to become, rather than a 6-hitter or a 7-hitter, make him be your cleanup. He has to be the anchor of your lineup. Now it's something else. Now he doesn't have the protection that he had when he was in New York, and now it's a different story. And I think we may have overlooked that, and the Indians, I think, certainly did. But you raise a good point, too, that if you look at probably the three guys who have been the, not necessarily surprises, but certainly the core of the team this year. You look at Michael Brantley, you look at Corey Kluber, and you look at like Jan Gomes. I know there's a couple guys in the bullpen too that have kind of emerged. But you look at those three and you say, okay, the way that they were acquired, that is savvy. That is a savvy front office that is capable of doing smart things. They acquired all three of those guys in nice afterthought sort of trades. Michael Brantley was a player to be named later. Kluber was an afterthought part of the Westbrook trade, and then Jan Gomes, we didn't even think about it at the time. That was I don't even think most people really realized that it happened. But the point is that look at those three, and those three certainly look they're sort of going to be the future of this team for the next couple of years. That this front office is capable of doing smart things, and I think if there's it's sort of an overview of the front office and where their problems are, I think they're much better at evaluating other teams' talent than their own. I think that's where they run into problems in the past.
I agree. And I think, too, here's another thing, and this doesn't get talked about. This is my own, just kind of being a psychologist here of the Indians front office, is it's part of the mistakes you make, it becomes a part of what you're doing. When you are living in the culture of always trying to get the value for your dollar, if this guy has a bounce back, then he's a good value at this. And that's our favorite words in spring training is we signed these guys because we think they got a bounce back year. We think last year was an aberration and they're going to get back to average. The problem is when you live in that all the time, you start to over evaluate how you can improve guys, and you start to think that everybody is going to have a bounce back next year, and you get in this position where you're at now, where nobody has a bounce back year, and you're like, damn, that did not work out like we thought, because we mentioned all the way back to the winter, JK, you and I, about how the biggest free agent signing for this year was the recovery of Bourne and Swisher and giving you what you thought you were getting last year.
Yeah. And a great point that people are bellyaching a lot now about Scott Kazmir. And, the Indians, if only they'd have signed him, all their problems would be solved. The first problem with that is, who in the world could have foreseen Kazmir doing what he's doing now? Nobody. Don't sit there and tell me that you knew this guy was going to have the kind of year he had, and you were demanding and furious when the Indians didn't re-sign him. He is an example. He's a great example of what you just said, a bounce-back year. He had... They expected nothing out of Kazmir last year. You talk about picking up a guy off the scrap heap. Gave him a totally serviceable, very respectable year last year, had an ERA around 4, won around 9, 10, 11 games. What was nice down the stretch, really solidified that rotation. That's a bounce back year. That's what you get. You get what you pay for there. And now the problem with that is, basically, John Axford. They thought, well, we can pick him up and fix him just the way we fixed Kazmir, and look, it'll be great. We have the magic touch. No, you don't. It doesn't work every time. That's exactly it. So, while that's not to discourage you from trying to pick up guys and get maybe squeeze one more year out of them, admit that that's what you're doing, and that's at best putting your thumb in the dike. That's a short-term solution, and it does not always work. It works probably less than half the time.
Absolutely, and then when you tie in the fact of when you do spend, you haven't done it wisely, and you're drafting up until probably around 10, 11 was around the time when they changed the staff out and they started drafting differently, because when you look at the decade before that, that's the part of the reason why the Indians ended up where they are, and it comes back.
And still are where they are. They're still haunted by that. That was a good 10 years of just wasted draft.
People, the Browns and the Indians, people make those comparisons, and I say that's the same thing. I go, when you look at why the Browns ended up where they did, you always point to the draft, and you go, look, they went for a decade in the draft. Indians did the same thing. It just takes 5 years after the draft for you to start seeing that.
And that's why the Indians have sort of lucked out in a way. They sort of get that benefit that you don't. It's not like football or the NBA where you blow a draft pick, it within 2 months. You're like, oh, wow, they blew that. With baseball, you're right. It takes 4 or 5 years before you say, oh, yeah, you know what? We're just now understanding. 2010, 2011, 2009, those were not good drafts. We're not going to know how the Indians' 2014 draft went until about 2017, 2018. So they have that sort of gap there that there's not this immediate outcry, and I think that the magnitude of how bad they've been doesn't sink in until you look back and, okay, here's their last 10 draft picks, and however many of them, 3 of them